When people picture medieval warfare, they usually imagine knights charging across an open field, swords, banners, and the clash of armor. But a lot of armies were not destroyed in the middle of battle. They were weakened, surprised, or thrown into chaos while they were resting, eating, or trying to sleep. That is why camp security mattered so much in medieval Europe. A military camp was not just a place to stop for the night. It was a temporary fortress, a supply base, a command center, and the one place where an army was most vulnerable if its defenses failed. Commanders had to think about where to camp, how to arrange the tents, how to guard the baggage, how to post watches, and how to stop enemy scouts, raiders, or sudden night attacks from breaking everything apart. Even simple things like ditches, wagons, signals, and assigned positions could decide whether an army stayed organized or collapsed before the real fighting even began. Medieval camp security was not a minor detail on the edge of war. It was one of the systems that kept armies alive long enough to fight at all. Number 1. The ground. In medieval Europe, camp security started before a single tent went up. The first question was simple. Where can an army stop without handing the enemy an advantage for free? The military book that Western commanders kept coming back to for centuries was Vegetius, and later medieval writers kept repeating the same core rule. Choose ground that is naturally strong, healthy, and supplied with what an army needs to stay alive. Las Siete Partidas, the great Castilian law code of the 13th century, says a camp should not sit under hills the enemy can seize, in a marsh, or in a place where floodwater can trap men and animals. It should be near water, grass, and wood, because security was never only about keeping swords out. It was also about keeping the army working. Medieval military writing tied camp safety to clean water, good air, proper shelter, and enough forage, and it warned against lingering too long in unhealthy places. That tells you a lot about the medieval way of thinking. A bad campsite could weaken an army without any battle at all. Men got sick, horses failed, supplies ran short, and the camp became harder to defend because the army inside it was already breaking down. So the safe camp was not just hidden or fortified. It had to be supportable. Medieval commanders were thinking about tomorrow's march, tomorrow's watch, and tomorrow's horses at the same time they were thinking about tonight's enemy. It was a place where soldiers could still eat, drink, sleep, mount up, and form ranks the next morning. In other words, site selection was the first wall of the camp, and if commanders got that step wrong, everything that followed became weaker. Number 2. The layout. Once the ground had been chosen, the camp was arranged like a temporary town, and that order was a security device in its own right. Las Siete Partidas says the Lord's tent should stand in the center, with officers around it, and the rest of the army set out behind them like houses in a town. If the ground was square, streets were to be laid out lengthwise and crosswise, and banners were used to mark where troops belonged. Even before the commander dismounted, the rear guard had to come in, because a camp was most exposed when men were still arriving, unloading, and looking for their place. English ordinances show the same obsession with exact placement. Harbingers, or herbergers, were the men allowed to go ahead and assign quarters, and soldiers were not supposed to seize lodging on their own or move once quarters had been given out. That rule sounds small, but it mattered. A camp full of men choosing their own spots became a maze. A camp assigned by officials could be searched, counted, and controlled. It also meant commanders knew which captain was responsible for which space if a post failed or a disturbance broke out. A camp laid out by banner, captain, and assigned quarter became readable. In darkness, in rain, or under sudden alarm, men could find their own standard and fall in with the right group instead of drifting into panic. The layout also reflected rank, which made command faster. The commander was in the center because messages, protection, and decision-making all had to flow from one point. So, when people imagine medieval camps as loose fields of random tents, they miss the main point. The planned camp was a working map of the army, and that map reduced confusion before the first alarm ever sounded.
Number 3. The edge. After the ground and the layout came the boundary, and medieval sources are very clear that the edge of camp had to be hardened. Las Siete Partidas describes several ways to do it. If carts were available, they could be placed around the camp like a wall. If carts were not available, iron-tipped stakes linked with ropes could create a barrier around the whole encampment. If even that was missing, tents could be set so closely together that mounted or foot attackers could not easily burst through. The same code also says that when an army expected to stay in one place for a while, the commander should surround the camp with a ditch, both to block damage from the enemy and to keep animals and property from being stolen or lost. That is the key idea. The perimeter was meant to slow an attack, expose it, and buy time. It gave sentries a line to hold, made infiltrators easier to spot, and forced raiders to bunch up where defenders could answer them instead of drifting into the camp from every side. It also controlled exits, which mattered just as much when baggage animals wandered or thieves tried to slip away. The shape itself could change with the ground, whether long, square, or round, but the logic stayed the same. Medieval Europe did not simply copy Roman camps one for one, yet the old Roman model still mattered, because Vegetius remained one of the most influential military texts of the Middle Ages. The fortified field camp stayed alive as an ideal, even when local practice varied. So the line around camp was never just a rough border. It was a built-in delay, a way to make surprise harder and to turn sleeping troops into troops behind an obstacle. That single difference could decide whether a night attack became a disaster or a failed raid. Number 4. The screen. The system did not end at the ditch or the wagon line, because medieval commanders knew the most dangerous moment often came before the camp was fully settled, or while men were outside it, gathering what the army needed. Las Siete Partidas says scouts should be sent out to examine the surrounding country, and sentinels should be placed everywhere, so the army would not be injured while in camp. It also warns that the king and his knights should not simply dismount and relax before the rear guard and baggage train have arrived, because enemies often targeted that weaker part of the column first. The same law code adds another useful detail. When men went out to collect wood, grass, or straw, armed troops were supposed to guard them and watch the countryside so the enemy could not fall on them suddenly. English ordinances from the 15th century show this same logic in much tighter detail. They describe foragers working inside a protected zone while mounted detachments called stales moved outside them, scouting for enemies and shielding the men gathering supplies. A trumpet signaled the start of foraging. The stale rode forward first, and those collecting food or fodder were ordered not to stray beyond that protection. The rules even separated responses by role, because not everyone was meant to do the same thing when danger appeared. If an alarm was raised, different groups had different jobs. Armed men moved toward the stale, while pages and carters were supposed to fall back toward the host. What that gives you is a layered security picture. The main army in the center, working parties around it, and a moving outer screen beyond them. Camp security, then, was not just about guarding sleep. It was about protecting every vulnerable task that kept an army alive between battles. Number 5. The night watch. Night is where the whole system becomes easiest to see, because the rules get harsh and very specific. In the English ordinances, every man had to keep his assigned watch with the men assigned to him and stay there for the full term. Captains were responsible for watch within their own lodging areas, which meant the entire encampment was supposed to be covered all the time, not just the outer edge. The penalties show how seriously commanders took this. Leaving watch without authority could bring extreme punishment, because one failed post could open a path for surprise, theft, or panic. The same sources also crack down on false alarms. One set of ordinances punishes men who cry out unlawfully in camp, or raise a disturbance by shouting names or making noise that could start an affray. Another says that after the watch was set, no one was to shout, blow horns, whistle, or make any great noise at night, unless it was an authorized trumpet signal. That rule makes perfect sense once you see how alarms worked. Trumpet blasts were used to tell horsemen when to saddle, when to bridle, and when to mount and rally to the standard of their own lord or captain. So random noise at night was not just annoying. It could make cavalry bolt toward their horses, throw the camp into confusion, and send men running before anyone knew whether there was a real enemy at all. Silence, watch rotations, standards, and signal discipline all belonged to the same system. The job was not only to detect danger, it was to prevent the camp from frightening itself into chaos. In practice, that meant discipline mattered as much as courage. A quiet, obedient camp could survive the dark. A noisy one might destroy its own order before the enemy ever reached the line. Number 6. The baggage. A medieval army could lose its strength without ever losing a pitched battle. If the baggage scattered, if horses went missing, if water was fouled, or if supplies stopped coming, the army started to collapse from inside. That is why so many camp rules treat baggage, animals, and victuals as security problems rather than simple logistics. Las Siete Partidas says loads should be brought together and placed on beasts of burden, so the baggage train does not straggle and become hard to protect. That same source also warns that enemies might strike the guard escorting the baggage when they learn an army is encamped, assuming the men inside camp will be slow to help. Medieval military writing went further by connecting safety to clean water and sanitation. Manuals discussed by modern scholarship stress the need for healthy locations, good water, and putting sanitary needs outside the camp rather than inside it. The same tradition warns against animals muddying water used by the army. That is a practical security issue, because sickness can disable a camp just as effectively as an assault. English ordinances also tried to protect the flow of food into camp by forbidding soldiers to rob victuallers and merchants bringing provisions to the market of the host. That point matters more than it may seem. A secure camp needed roads that still worked, traders willing to approach, and animals still fit to move. So the system that protected armies was not only shield, ditch, and sentry. It also depended on routine traffic moving the right way, animals being where they should be, and food reaching camp without being stolen on the road. That is what kept the camp functioning as a machine instead of a crowd. It was also the protection of wagons, horses, fodder, clean streams, and the people bringing food through the gate. Number 7. Inside the lines. A lot of medieval camp security was really internal policing. Commanders had to know who belonged in the camp, where they belonged, and what they were doing there. English ordinances show this very clearly. Prisoners had to be guarded so they could not move about the quarters, spy on the army, or slip away. Soldiers were not supposed to grab quarters for themselves, leave assigned lodgings, or shift around without command. Captains were even restricted in how many king's soldiers they could pull away for personal comfort in setting up tents, halls, or pavilions, because every man diverted to private service was a man taken away from military work such as guarding, carrying, or foraging. The rules on women also make more sense when seen through this lens. Different ordinances do not simply ban all women in the same way. Some evidence suggests lawful wives might still be tolerated, while common women, or prostitutes, were treated as a serious problem. Why? Because commanders saw them as causes of quarrels, distraction, spying, and extra pressure on supply and protection. In one English ordinance, common women were forbidden from coming within the host, or even within 3 miles of it. And the explanation offered by modern analysis is blunt. Fewer uncontrolled people meant less chance of spying, less strain on food, and fewer disputes inside the camp. So medieval camp security was not only about keeping enemies out, it was about making everyone inside the camp easy for commanders to track and control. It was also about reducing loose talk, private conflict, uncontrolled movement, and all the small breakdowns that could make a big army fragile. A quiet, ordered camp was a safer camp. Number 8. The wagon fort. By the late Middle Ages, some armies pushed this whole idea one step further and turned the camp itself into a fighting weapon.
In 15th century Bohemia, Wagenburg tactics helped break the old dominance of heavy cavalry by making the field camp mobile, armed, and ready to fight on short notice. The basic principle was simple enough. Wagons locked together into a defensive formation, protected by men-at-arms, crossbowmen, and artillery. What matters here is that this was not only a battlefield trick. It was the perimeter, the rally point, the supply screen, and the shelter for men and animals all at once. A good example of how far this logic spread comes from 1431, when the imperial abbey of Ellwangen equipped campaign wagons for war against the Hussites. Its accounts record wagons prepared with chains and other fittings, together with canvas, tents, cooking gear, food containers, and even cloth for horse shelters that could be put up on the move. That detail is valuable because it shows field security as a complete package. The wagon was not just transport. It was a piece of fortification, carrying the daily life of the army inside it. That is why wagon security mattered so much. Lose the wagons, and you did not just lose cover. You lost tools, food, cloth, cookware, ammunition, horse equipment, and the protected space from which the army could reorganize. Scholars of late medieval Bohemia point out that Wagenburg tactics were part of the wider shift that weakened the long dominance of armored cavalry. And Cambridge research on the 1431 anti-Hussite campaign shows that even relatively modest institutions were adapting to this new kind of mobile defense. By this stage, camp security had become fully operational warfare. A moving fortress built to let an army halt, supply itself, survive attack, and fight from behind its own walls. The medieval camp was no longer only a place to rest. In the best hands, it was part of the army's weapon system.